Hello, everybody. You are listening to WIDR Kalamazoo, and this is The Bottom Line with me as your host, Harrison Cramer, where we take life's inconsistencies and match them with foundational truths. I want to thank you guys so much for listening. And if you haven't heard of my show, The Bottom Line, that's because this is actually the first official episode. And so I had a test run last week that seemed to go well enough. And now I have a consistent show that will be every week at this time. So every Tuesday at 3 p.m., I will be doing my show, The Bottom Line. And if you don't know anything about me, my name is Harrison Cramer, as I already said. I'm a student at Western Michigan University. I'm in a music and technology major. I make hip-hop music and I write songs, but the most valuable thing about myself, the thing I pride above anything else, is that I'm a follower of Jesus. And with that said, I want to kind of get into why I'm calling this show The Bottom Line. And so, to me, when I hear the phrase "the bottom line," I think of a conversation that's kind of going back and forth. And then when someone says, "Hold up, here's the bottom line," that's kind of the be-all, end-all. It's kind of the foundation of the conversation, what everything is going off of. And so, even though the conversation might be going in a lot of different directions, there might be a lot of things thrown in there from each side, the bottom line stays the same. And so I'm calling it The Bottom Line because I kind of see my life as the conversation, highly inconsistent, a lot of things happening that are out of my control. But for me, I believe the bottom line is that God's love and God's grace sustains me and that it doesn't change. So no matter what is thrown into the mix, God's love, the bottom line, stays the same and it's still true. And I want to talk about one of the many aspects that come along with this phrase, the bottom line, that I've chosen to use as the title of the show. So let's get into it. I'm going to start by telling you guys some personal experiences of mine and how I've reached consistency in my life. And then we're going to actually get into some of the Bible. We're going to break down some passages where Jesus himself is speaking, and we're going to break it down and see what is actually going on there. And then later we're going to play some music, and then with our remaining time, we're just going to kind of see what happens. So first, I'd like to share some of my experiences with you guys. If anyone knows me well, they know that I am a highly emotional person. I rely a lot on my emotions, and they influence how I operate within relationships and just how I go about my day. My emotions say a lot about how my day is going to be. And if any of you can relate to being highly emotional, then you know it's not a bad thing. And you know it's definitely not a sign of weakness. It just means that we are more in tune to what influences our heart and what affects us than maybe some other people are. And if you're not highly emotional, that's also totally cool too. We're all a little bit different, and I just happen to be pretty highly emotional and easily influenced and affected in that type of way. And I want to talk about how that character trait of mine affects my relationship with people and also affects my relationship with God. That's actually what I want to focus on the most, is how my fluctuating emotions have affected how me and God interact with each other. And so growing up, if any of you heard my episode from last week during the WIDR training hour, you heard that I grew up in a Christian household. So I grew up being able to be a part of a lot of events that were very spiritual and very Holy Spirit driven and very Jesus centered. And so I got to go on events such as mission trips. I got to be a part of week-long camps where you would just learn about this stuff. You'd focus on it and you'd be around other people who are doing the same thing. And I've been to many worship nights where you just experience, the goal is to experience God. And so I've been a part of a lot of these things. And growing up, when I was a part of these things, what would happen was what we would call spiritual highs. And if you don't know what a spiritual high is, it's kind of for me, it was feeling extremely close to God due to the environment I was in or the people I was around. And it was something I liked very much. And so when I would go to these week-long camps or these mission trips or attend these worship nights, I would get these spiritual highs and I would feel just incredibly close to God and I would love it. But there was a downside to it because just like any high, once the experience is over, the high is over. And so once the mission trip ended or the camping trip ended or the worship night was done and we stopped singing songs, the spiritual high was also over. And once that was done, I didn't have anything to pick back up off of that. I didn't have anything to go off of once that left me. And so this affected how my relationship with God went, because my closeness to him and my relationship with him was entirely dependent upon how I felt about him or how close I felt to him. And so when I had experiences where I felt close to him, our relationship was going well. And then when those experiences would end and I lost that spiritual high, I would feel distant from him and our relationship would not be good on my end, at least. And so I sometimes would try to recapture this feeling that we would get at these camps or whatever, and so that I could feel close to God. And I really was relying on certain things to make me feel like I was close to him instead of actually being close to him. My feelings were more important than what was actually going on in the relationship. And this isn't something that I wanted to keep doing. This isn't how I wanted to keep living my life, because sometimes God was the thing I wanted most, then other times God was the thing I wanted least. And my heart, just like I was explaining earlier with the concept of bottom line, my heart is what was inconsistent and is what is inconsistent. I can be happy, angry, sad, all within a matter of minutes. My emotions change so drastically that if I base my relationship with God on how I feel at the time, I'm not going to be close to him very often because I'm not always feeling good and I'm not always happy. And so it wasn't until I was in high school that it wasn't until then that someone gave me something solid to go off of that could lead to a firm foundation that didn't just rely on emotions. And so when I was in high school, I went to a Sunday school service before the actual church service. And if you don't know what Sunday school is kind of meeting up with other people in your age group and kind of a smaller group and doing a Bible study type thing before the actual church service. So this happened on Sunday. It was before what you would think of as a church service, and you would just be there and you would learn with other people your age. And so I remember being at one of those, and usually I never thought too much of that. It was maybe something I felt like I had to go to. I didn't enjoy it a whole lot. But this particular Sunday, they were talking about joy and happiness. And they said that there was a difference between the two. And that's something I never thought of before. I always kind of thought of joy and happiness as being one and the same, just two different ways to say the same thing. But they went into depth and they said that they said that happiness is temporary and is determined by circumstances. And then they said that joy is foundational and does not change. It is not subject to change. It is kind of the default of the heart in the ideal sense. And I started to realize that a lot of my life was based on whether I was happy or not, and how I felt about people and how I felt about God was based on my happiness that was rapidly fluctuating all the time. And happiness isn't bad. Happiness is amazing, but happiness is meant to be a complement to joy. And when they started talking about joy as this foundational groundwork that all other emotions can be built upon, I saw it as something that I wanted, because my relationship with God had been so inconsistent for so long that if there was something more foundational out there for me to have, then I was down to take a hold of it instead of having to rely on how I felt. And so this concept of happiness versus joy led to me seeking out a firm foundation and a life of consistency. And I didn't really know how that would look, and I didn't really know where to find that until I chose to take a step into embarking on this journey, which meant no longer relying on just how I feel, but relying on something greater than that, relying on the underlying thing that other things can be built upon instead of just how I feel in the moment. And so I needed to know where I could get this, if it was available to me, and how to keep it, how to keep a firm foundation and how to keep consistency in my life. And what it came down to was it could be found in a person. It could be found in the teachings of a person. And that's why I want to dive into the Bible today. So I'm going to open up on my phone. I'm going to open up to Luke chapter 6, and I'm going to read verses 46 through 49. If you guys would like to, and you have a Bible on you, or if you just want to Google it, or if you have it on your phone, again, it's going to be Luke chapter 6, 46 through 49. This is going to be a passage from Jesus himself talking about how to build a firm foundation. And it's written in the Gospels. The book of Luke is called a Gospel. It's one of 4 books in the Bible that talk about Jesus's actual life here on earth. And so Luke was someone who was giving his side of the story of his experiences with Jesus, or what he heard. He was collecting information, and he wrote about the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. So Jesus says, "Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I say? As for everyone who comes to me and hears my words and puts them into practice, I will show you what they are like. They are like a man building a house who dug down deep and laid the foundation on rock. When a flood came, the torrent struck the house, but that house could not, when the flood came, the torrent struck that house, but could not shake the house, because it was well built. But the one who hears my words and does not put them into practice is like a man who built a house on the ground without a foundation. The moment the torrent struck that house, it collapsed, and its destruction was complete." So I'm going to break this down verse by verse and try my best to get to the bottom of what Jesus is talking about in this context. So if we look at the first verse, it says, Jesus is talking to these people, and he says, "Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I say? As for everyone who comes to me and hears my words and puts them into practice, I'll show you what they are like." So he's saying these people are coming up to him and referring to him as Lord, Lord, which is not a term to be taken lightly. They're calling him Master. They're calling him Counselor. And they're giving him this high title, and yet they aren't doing what he says. And so he already sees that although they are acknowledging him with their mouths by them using titles like Lord, Lord, he knows that they don't really love him, and they aren't really going to listen to him unless they do what he says. And then he says in verse 47, "As for everyone who comes to me and hears my words and puts them into practice, I will show you what they are like." And so he says, everyone who comes, hears, and practices, I will show you what they are like. He's about to get into what this person is like if they not only come to him, and not even if they only hear him, but if they practice what he says. So already we can tell that it's not enough for us to just come to him. It's also not enough for us to just listen to him. He wants us to put his words into practice. So we must do something. And if you know anything about practice, if you've ever been a part of any sports team, or if you play an instrument, or basically anything you do that you want to be good at, you need to practice it. And practice comes with a lot of trial and error, but the beautiful thing about practice is it develops consistency that leads to a good performance. And so Jesus wants us to put his words into practice, not just hear them, but put them into practice so that we can have consistency and a foundation. And then the next verse, verse 48, they are like a man building a house who dug down deep and laid the foundation on rock. When a flood came, the torrent struck that house, but could not shake it because it was well built. So if you are going to build a house, I would hope that you want to build it so it will last, hopefully last even longer than you do. So you need to find a firm foundation to build this house on so that it can't be easily destroyed. It needs to be something that will last. And so that's why Jesus is using this metaphor of a house, because our life, our heart is like the house. And then the foundation that we choose to build upon is it's what we believe, it's what we're choosing to follow. And the other thing that this verse says that I think is really interesting is that it says, the man dug deep and laid the foundation on rock. So not only did the man build the house on rock, but he had to dig deep to do it, which isn't easy. And that probably means it took quite a bit of time. So this man who is choosing to build his house in a wise place recognizes it's not easy and recognizes that he needs to put hard work and dig deep in order to do so. And that says, when the flood came, the torrent struck that house but could not shake it because it was well built. It says when the flood came. So this guy built the house knowing that a flood was going to come. He didn't build the house hoping that a flood wasn't going to come and being like, oh, maybe. He knew for sure that the flood was going to come and it was coming for his house. And so he made sure beforehand that he was building on a solid foundation because what was coming was inevitable. The things he could not control were inevitable. And so the flood struck the house, but did not shake it because it was built on the rock. And if Jesus is the rock, then we know that these characteristics can be applied to him as a person as well. And so he does not get shaken. Anything that is built on him will last, and anything that is built on him is considered wise. And then the final verse in that says, but the one who hears my words and does not put them into practice is like a man who built a house on the ground without a foundation. The moment the torrent struck that house, it collapsed and its destruction was complete. So these people, they came to Jesus, they heard his words, but they didn't practice them. They didn't build on the foundation that he had given them. They built on, it says they built without a foundation. And so if a house is built without a foundation, the second a storm comes, the second the wind blows or a wave hits it, it will be destroyed and it'll all fall to the ground. And so with these passages, I had to take a look at my life and recognize, or I had to ask myself if I was building on a firm foundation or if I was building without a foundation. And if I was building on a firm foundation, then I saw that as a reflection of the joy that I was taught about. Because if joy was the default and everything else was built upon it, then no matter how I felt, I still had that joy in my heart. And if I didn't have that, if I didn't choose to accept it, I could keep going in my life without a foundation of purely relying on how I feel, but I wasn't going to last. And anytime something that was out of my control hit me, I wouldn't have a foundation to hold on to because I was relying on my feelings and I was relying on my happiness a little too much. And so what this meant was, if I was going to be in a relationship with Jesus, then I was going to be okay. Because if he's the foundation that he says he is, and he does not get shaken and he does not get stirred, then he can hold all of my inconsistencies, and he can handle them with ease. So if he was going to be the foundation and the joy in my life, him and I were okay to operate together within a relationship. Even though my heart fluctuates and the emotions fluctuate minute by minute, he does not. He stays the same and he's never shaken. So we're cool to operate together. I just needed to choose it. And how I needed to choose it was to obey, like this passage talked about, put it into practice. This meant pursuing God, not just when I felt like it, but pursuing God like it's training. So if you are training for something, or like the practice metaphor from before, you do it every day, even if you don't feel like it. Once I started to practice and do things consistently, then I was able to enjoy a relationship with God a lot more, because it was finally consistent and foundational instead of just all over the place depending on how my day was going. And I want to share a quick quote that I don't remember who said it, but the quote goes like this: "You can't feel your way into good behavior, but you can behave your way into good feelings." Now I'll say that again real quick. You cannot feel your way into good behavior, but you can behave your way into good feelings. And what this is saying is you can wait till you feel good to do something, or you can do something and as a result feel good. And that's kind of confusing, but you can wait till you feel like doing the dishes to go and do the dishes, or you can consistently do the dishes and then eventually you'll actually want to do the dishes. You'll actually want to be productive and you'll actually want to get things done. And so instead of me pursuing a relationship with God when I felt like it, I needed to choose to pursue a relationship with God all the time. And then I found that the feelings followed that. So when I was choosing to be consistent with putting effort towards my relationship with God, happiness and proper emotions fell into place as a result. And so because of this, spiritual highs that I was talking about earlier were no longer quite as common. So we would go to these camps and these worship nights, and I remember some of the friends I grew up with who were also pursuing God like I was. The camp would get over, the experience would get over, and we would tell each other, I don't feel any different. I feel the same. And at first it felt kind of weird, but then we recognized it as something to celebrate, because that meant that we were close to God, that Jesus had given us steps to obey throughout the year, that when these experiences came, they only complemented what we already had instead of gave us what we needed. Because choosing to obey Jesus, we already had something, and it was complemented by the thing that used to be the spiritual high. And so we all have a lot of inconsistencies in our lives. We have things that we just cannot control. And for me, a lot of that comes from my heart. It comes from the way I feel. I'm easily influenced by things. But for you guys and for many other people, it might be actual circumstances that we can't control. Things that are just out of our reach that happen to us. But the bottom line is, no pun intended, that there's something out there that was made available to me, and I grabbed onto it so that my inconsistencies could be built on top of something that never changed. My fluctuating happiness, sadness, and anger could be placed on top of a joy that was so foundational that no matter if I was happy, sad, or angry, I had joy still anyways. No matter what is thrown our way, if that house is properly built on the proper foundation of a rock, then Jesus is promising to not be shaken. And he's giving us an invitation to build our lives upon that. All right, welcome back to The Bottom Line. This is Harrison Cramer. We already discussed the meaning behind why I'm calling the show The Bottom Line. I shared with you guys some personal stories of mine and how my emotions a lot of time ruled and affected how I interacted with God and how I interacted with most things in life. It was dependent upon how I felt and whether I was happy or not. And then we dove into some of the Bible. We talked about the book of Luke, and when Jesus is talking about building a house on a firm foundation or with no foundation of all, and how I found that helpful in my life. That was basically the gist of the main things I wanted to cover today. There are a couple things I want to share with you guys in our remaining 15 minutes or so, but I really wanted to just explain why I'm calling the show The Bottom Line and why I think that's important to me and how that has impacted me and how Jesus spoke into that in my life. I want to just share with you guys a couple things that I've just been learning in general this week and how God has been working in my life as a college student and as just a human being in general. So this past week has involved me taking 2 very big exams and turning in a project that was required an extensive amount of work. And I've usually, when it comes exam time, it comes time for midterms. That's not when I feel very close to God because I'm having a hard time during those seasons and it's very stressful and it's filled with a lot of anxiety of, am I going to do this well? How am I going to do this at all? And it just feels overwhelming. But I wanted to share with you guys that this past week, although it was the busiest and most overwhelming week of my semester so far, was one of the weeks I actually felt closest and felt most encouraged by God, because I felt like I was spending all of my time studying and reading and just practicing these things so that I could perform well on the exam and do well on my project. And as I was pursuing these things and engaging in them, and as it was taking up pretty much all my time, I could feel God just renewing my energy and renewing my motivation, because this work towards my class and this work towards my major is something that He values as well. So He also values the things that I'm passionate about. And I think it could even be argued that the things I'm passionate about, God is even more passionate about that. So if I'm passionate about hip hop, I'm passionate about just art and music in general, it's possible that God is even more passionate about that. And so when He sees that we choose to engage in these things and put forth a lot of effort and a lot of work into them, I think He's willing to renew us so that we can keep doing that, because that's something He is also passionate about. And I could feel times during the week when I needed to spend time with God. I needed to just take a break and reach out to Him, engage in the Bible, or do whatever it took to get back in line with Him. And when the time came around for me to do that, when He presented those opportunities, it wasn't easy to take those opportunities, but it was during those times that I could feel Him, and He informed me that this work is good. And so instead of feeling just uncertain and overwhelmed even when everything was done, because when it comes to midterms and finals, I feel very stressed out during the week, and then after it's all done, there is a sense of peace, but also a sense of uncertainty. But that wasn't the case this time, because once this was done, there was a sense of rest because it was all over, but the uncertainty wasn't there because the work that was put in and the intentionality behind it was driven by God. So I was happy with what the outcome was going to be because I put what I felt like was a lot of work into it. And so that's just something I've learned this past week, and it's been very helpful for me, and that was very encouraging for God to show me that. And I had a lot of friends who were also there to help me throughout that as well. And just another general thing I've learned this past week is what it means when God says that he made people in his image, and how serious that is to be taken. I was listening to a podcast by a guy named KB and a guy named Amin. KB actually was the rapper in one of the songs that I just played. He's one of my favorite artists. He's very wise, and he was talking about how if people are made in the image of God, then there are certain things that they are not meant for. If everyone has the image of God woven into them, they are not meant to be disrespected. They are not meant to be treated poorly. And so this is something that I just felt convicted of. It felt like that's something I could be doing a better job at. And so that's something I've been taking a little bit more seriously ever since I heard that. And I also saw that when I was reading a book called Acts in the Bible. The book of Acts occurs after Jesus goes back into heaven. So the book starts with Jesus coming back from the dead, giving one last command to his disciples, and then going up to heaven. And the rest of the book of Acts is about what his disciples do with the command that he's given them, and the amazing things that happen because of that. And so in the book of Acts, you're introduced to this guy named Saul, who does not like what the disciples are doing with the commands that Jesus has given them, because they're going around, they're helping people, they're starting the first ever church, and it's exploding. There's thousands of people joining it. People are being healed. All these crazy things are happening. But Saul was raised a little differently, and he didn't believe what they were doing was right or true. And so he started persecuting all these people who were Christians, but at that time, they just called themselves the Way. So the Way with a capital W was what the early church referred to themselves as. And this guy Saul was just on this onslaught of imprisoning all these people who believed in Jesus and persecuting them. And some people even died as a result of it. And then one day, as Saul was going towards a city called Damascus, he was encountered by Jesus. Jesus encountered him in a really supernatural way that's kind of hard to understand, but it was very bright. Jesus spoke in a loud voice and asked Saul, "Why do you persecute me?" And so Jesus shows up to Saul, this guy who's been persecuting the church, and said, "Why do you persecute me?" He didn't just say, "Why do you persecute the people?" He said, "Why me?" And so what this means is that when Paul was persecuting the people of Christ, in doing so, he was actually persecuting Christ himself. And that's something that really just struck me, because I might not be going around and persecuting churches, but if I am treating people poorly, or if I'm ignoring people, then it's almost like I'm ignoring Jesus. Because if they're made in his image, if I believe everyone is made in the image of God, and that Jesus belongs inside of them, then if I treat them poorly and ignore them, that's what I'm doing to Jesus. So even though Paul was persecuting the church, he was actually persecuting Jesus. And so when I talk behind someone's back, or I make a joke that takes it a little too far, I'm actually doing that to Jesus, to the person that I claim to value above anything else. And so that was really a reality check for me, and something really good for me to hear, because I just need to take more seriously how I treat my friends, how I treat my brothers, how I treat my family, even in the little things, and understand that if I desire to give the utmost respect to the person of Jesus, then I need to give the utmost respect to people in general, especially if they belong to him. And so those are just a couple of the random things that I have learned this past week, and I'm looking forward to, in the future, just sharing with you guys random things like that, because I intend to cover general topics like we did earlier for the first half hour or so, and then there will always be music during the show, and then I do just want to share things that are recently happening in my life, recent things that I'm figuring out that God is revealing to me, so that I can share with you guys, and you guys can grow with me if you want to. And so I'm laying out these things and how God is working in my life. And if you identify with that, that is amazing. And if you don't, hopefully you can apply that to some other aspect of your life and it can be useful in some other way. And so with that said, I got one question on Instagram because I kind of did it at the last minute from my brother. And he said, when are you going to make a music video with your brothers? So if you don't know, I have 4 brothers. I am the second youngest. There are 5 of us. There are 3 above me, 1 younger than me. And they're all very creative in their own right and very passionate in their own right. But I'm the only one who's going in the route of music. And so he asked me when I'm going to make a music video with him and the rest of our brothers. And Taylor, I would like to tell you in the summer. Hopefully that can happen sometime in the summer because that would be a lot of fun. Yeah, Taylor, hopefully this summer we can figure out a way to get a music video going. I want to thank you guys so much for listening today. This has been The Bottom Line, and this will be a regular show that happens at WIDR Kalamazoo 89.1 FM every Tuesday at 3 p.m. I'll also be throwing these episodes up on my YouTube channel, hopefully within the next couple days. And so the one from last week and this one should be up on my channel this week. And again, my YouTube is Harrison Cramer, and that is Cramer with the C. Thank you guys so much for listening. This has been The Bottom Line, where we meet life's inconsistencies with foundational truth. See you guys next time.